Today we will talk about the biblical Hebrew word VaYehi. While short and seemingly simple, it is surprisingly difficult to translate into English. Please stay with me to find out more about it. We have encountered VaYehi for the first time on this channel as early as in Genesis 1:3. This is the base verb yehi, which means shall be in a biblical way, and on the opposite side of the next word, we see VaYehi, which we're focusing on today and is essentially the same word, but with a twist. For our purposes here, suffices to say that this letter Vav added in front is the conjunction and, but is also a converter of the verb from future to past. So this small letter turns the meaning of VaYehi into and was. This odd concept is a hallmark of Hebrew in the Bible and one of the features that sets it apart from the language in later periods, even in ancient times. I do recommend you to watch the episode about creating the light for more information. A link is in the description. There are two prominent and recurring phrases with this word in Genesis 1. VaYehi chen, or and it was so, and VaYehi erev VaYehi boker, or and it was evening and it was morning. So not a big difference in meaning compared to verse 3, right? But now things get a bit more complicated. VaYehi appears in the closing part of Genesis 4:8. Cain, or Cain in Hebrew, and Abel, or Hevel, are described to be in a field, and Cain then kills his brother. The literal translation of this part of the verse should be, and it was when they were in the field, but this probably doesn't sound too good in English, so the King James Version and many others following its footsteps used, and it came to pass. Other versions use and it happened or just skip VaYehi, providing no English match. Just to make sure, I respect the KJV and any of the English versions. As a translator myself, I know how hard it is to provide a reliable translation between two totally different languages. And translating the Bible is way more difficult than most other texts. Back to VaYehi. This verse is introducing us to an important use of VaYehi as a somewhat ceremonial word frequently placed at the beginning of biblical stories. In a way, it's like once upon a time in fairy tales or other common expressions in stories people tell. In fact, several books of the Tanakh or the Old Testament begin with VaYehi. Let's take Joshua 1:1 because the words following VaYehi are really straightforward. This is the same concept we've seen in Genesis 4:8, but here KJV translates it as both now and it came to pass, at the beginning and end of the clause, respectively. Once again, other versions just drop VaYehi and start with the next word, which is after or acharei in Hebrew. The book of Esther starts with the same word, and different versions took diverging approaches to go about translating VaYehi, which shows how rendering it into English can be challenging. Only the Amplified Bible translates this the closest to the literal meaning, it was, but they left out the and for an obvious stylistic consideration. By the way, adding VaYehi at the beginning of stories or biblical books is far from being necessary. Daniel 1:1 could have accommodated a VaYehi up in front, but it does not. One more example. Several dozen prophecies by Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu in Hebrew, Ezekiel or Yechezkel, and Zechariah or Zechariah start with this repeating phrase. The literal translation can be, and was the speaking of the Lord towards me to say. In the English versions, VaYehi is translated as then, now, or omitted altogether. Note that the verb came, appearing in many translations, is not present in the Hebrew verse and is only implied to make the sentence more English friendly. Actually, VaYehi is the verb, a derivative of the Hebrew equivalent for to be. So the Hebrew Bible says that the word of God was to Ezekiel, for example, and can potentially mean that the particular prophecy indeed came onto the prophet, but also given to or rested upon him, as well as other options.